You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.
Hello and welcome back to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast brought to you by 90 Min. As ever, I'm your host, Harry Symeou, and on this live edition, we are going to be discussing who has or who had the tougher job at Arsenal, Unai Emery or Mikel Arteta. I've wanted to do an episode like this for a while because one of the things that I get criticised for most is the way I spoke about Unai Emery's time at Arsenal, the fact that I called him out as not being the right man quite early, in some people's opinions too early. Some said I was incredibly unfair and therefore can't get their heads around why I've been a little bit more patient with Mikel Arteta. And it's for a number of reasons. But I thought the international break was the perfect time to really dig into this and really sort of look at it, in great detail, to really sit and focus on it and spend some time studying exactly what occurred. I've done this on a number of kind of factors, so I'm going to look forward to sharing those with you now throughout the podcast. But as I say, the question is, who has or had the tougher job at Arsenal? I don't think any of them had an easy job. Let's make that clear from the very beginning. I think that Unai Emery did some things well that Mikel Arteta hasn't. Equally, I think Mikel Arteta's had to deal with some things that Unai Emery didn't necessarily have to deal with as well. So I think it's a really, really interesting question. I think it's a really interesting debate, really interesting discussion. And I'm going to break it down for you on this episode. Now, the first thing I want to say is, if you disagree with me, which a lot of you probably will, and that's absolutely fine, please let me know in the comments what it is that you disagree with, why you disagree with it. We're all adults here. Let's get involved. Let's have a good debate about it. Let's have a good chat about it. I'll be taking some of your comments through the live stream as well. Rather than just going on Twitter and saying this guy is effing clueless and all that, which I've had plenty of in the last few weeks. Let's be sensible about it. Let's have a debate about it. And let's try and get to some kind of conclusion, some kind of summary on which of these two managers, Unai Emery and Mikel Arteta, has or had the tougher job. Now, I'm broken this down into some different stages. So I'm going to talk about the context in which they were hired. So the context in terms of when they were brought in, how they were brought in, why they were brought in, what they'd picked up in terms of the general state of the club, as well as a number of other factors. I've spent some time this morning looking at the squads and analysing the squads based on some statistics. I've also looked at their highs, their lows, etc., etc. And so, I look forward to coming up with the summary. And I put a nice little poll out on Twitter last night, which plenty of you have got involved in. So I'm going to be bringing you the results of that as well a little bit later on in the show. So let's start off with Unai Emery. Let's do it in chronological order. Unai Emery came in and replaced the great Arsene Wenger. Now, anybody coming in after Arsene Wenger was always going to have a massive job on their hands. You are talking about the greatest manager ever to manage Arsenal Football Club. I know a lot of people, as opinions of him changed in the second half of his tenure, I know a lot of people even look back now and say, yeah, well, he should have gone. And to a degree, I agree with that. But let's not deny that Arsene Wenger was the greatest manager this football club has ever seen, because he was. And I think the fact that we've fallen even further post his departure further evidences that, further backs that up. Now, yes, he made mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes along the way. But I said at the time that when Arsene Wenger left, it was imperative that Arsenal got the right man in. They hired Unai Emery, July 2018. Now, Unai Emery, it's clear as day, was not the first choice candidate. We know that Arsenal spoke to a number of different suitors. We know that Arsenal held a number of interviews, and the official word was that Unai Emery came in and blew them away, blew the recruitment people away by bringing plans, by bringing, detailed plans on each individual player, how he was going to make them better. That was what we were told by the club, wasn't it, at the time of Unai Emery's hire. But the fact that there were so many interviews going on, and the fact that he was only given a 2-year contract suggests to me that actually Unai Emery wasn't the first choice. I find it incredibly frustrating when I hear Arsenal come out and give reasoning like the reasoning they did around Unai Emery, because to me, it smelt of bullshit. Now, it smelt of bullshit for one simple reason. How the hell did Unai Emery come in that room and blow everybody away with his fantastic presentation when his English was so poor? Now, a lot of people don't want to bring this up, and a lot of people don't want to talk about it because they say, it's not politically correct to slag somebody off for not knowing the language. And I want to make it clear, I'm not slagging Unai Emery off. I can't speak Spanish. I would find it incredibly hard to go to another country and work and have to speak in another language and learn another language from scratch. So this is not to slag off Unai Emery, but I just find it unbelievable that Unai Emery has walked in to Arsenal Football Club and blown them away with a presentation when he's probably had to do it through a translator. I don't think it has that same power. I don't think it comes across the same. And so the reasoning for me seemed a little bit, a little bit of a cop-out from the football club. We know he wasn't the first choice. The fact that he was given a short-term contract, in my opinion, backed that up as well. And so, it wasn't the worst appointment in the world. Unai Emery was someone who had won 3 Europa Leagues with Sevilla, who had managed in Spain, who had managed, with Paris Saint-Germain, and had obviously won the league once out of his 2 seasons there, which for some people raised alarm bells. If you're not winning the league with PSG, some people would look at that as a failure. I didn't read into that too much at the time, but I did feel like, the fact that he was sacked from there, the fact that it didn't go well from there, kind of felt like he wasn't my first choice, put it that way. And I don't think he was the club's first choice either. Talked about how difficult it would have been to take over from Arsene Wenger. And again, that is a massive thing. It's a bit like when David Moyes took over from Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United. He was always going to find it really, really tough. And he was going to have to work miracles to get the buy-in of the fans who had just said goodbye to a legend. Now, the structure of the club at the time of Unai Emery's appointment was incredibly different. You look at the way it was set up at the time. Sven Mislintat was there, a man brought in to try and bring, good talents to the squad, to identify good young players to help with our recruitment, which had obviously been poor in the latter Wenger years. But what that meant is it took a lot of that power and a lot of that kind of responsibility away from Unai Emery. So I've got sympathy for Emery in that the structure wasn't necessarily geared towards giving him autonomy, if you like, towards giving him the power, but at least there was a structure, which can't be said right now. But we'll come on to the Arteta side of it a little bit later on. So the structure wasn't ideal for a manager. However, Unai Emery came in as a head coach, and that would have been made incredibly clear to him when he took the job. So he was going to have to face up to the fact that there were going to be players coming in, players going out, that maybe he wasn't necessarily 100% on board with. Did he have an input? I'm sure he did. If the head coach doesn't, then what the hell are you doing? Mind you, wouldn't put that past Arsenal. But I guess the structure is something you need to think about. Sven Mislintat in charge of recruitment, in charge of identifying players. And we know that Unai Emery didn't get all the players that he wanted. We know that he had to make do with players of different profiles to the players that he actually wanted. For example, we know he wanted Steven Nzonzi. He wanted a big, powerful, dominating central midfield player. And he got Lucas Torreira, the complete opposite. Yeah, tenacious, pretty good on the ball, had a lot of things going for him, Lucas Torreira, and it was a signing I was really excited about at the time, but he wasn't Steven Nzonzi. In fact, he was the polar opposite. We know that he wanted Wilfred Zaha, and Arsenal were not willing to go that extra mile in terms of putting the finance on the table to make that deal happen. He ended up with Nicolas Pepe, who Arsenal still put a lot of money into, only it worked a little bit more to their favour in terms of the structure of the deal and how they could pay for it, which ultimately was nothing to do with Unai Emery. So I accept and I acknowledge that the structure was different. I accept and I acknowledge that the head coach can only do what he can with the squad that he's got. And I appreciate that he didn't have the impact or the influence over some decisions that he would have liked to have a little bit more influence on. Mentioned the language barrier, big problem for me, not because it was necessarily an issue with the players. I'm sure there was, the right kind of set up to try and help with that. I know there were some senior players in the squad at the time, Nacho Monreal, Hector Bellerin, obviously Spanish speakers who were credited with helping Unai Emery along quite a bit in that. But, I think he struggled to win over the fans. He struggled to get us as a fan base to buy in to exactly what it was he was doing, because we couldn't really understand it. And I think that is, that is key. I think as a fan, if you understand or you can see a direction, you're willing to give it a little bit more time. I didn't really see it in terms of playing style when it came to Unai Emery, but I also didn't get it from his press conferences. So sometimes you can hear the right things and that can at least buy the manager a little bit of time. But in this case, where we weren't seeing it and we weren't hearing it either, it was really difficult to get fully on board with Unai Emery. Now, Unai Emery had experience when he took the job. Okay, there's no way for me that I would set my standards the same for Unai Emery as they were for Mikel Arteta in terms of time afforded. And what I mean by that is Unai Emery came in with plenty of experience behind him, and I expected him to do better quicker. Mikel Arteta was someone who was brought in with a view for the longer term, and we'll come on to talk about him in a bit. But although Unai Emery wasn't a desirable appointment for many of us, because let's be honest, prior to Unai Emery coming in, very few of us sat there and said, we want Unai Emery. Now, there were some people out there, to be fair to them, and I remember a couple of friends of mine who said, yeah, why not give Unai Emery a go? He's a decent manager. He's got a good record. Why not give him a go? Why not bring him in? Because he is the Europa League specialist and he could help us get back into the Champions League promised land. Why not? And I think that, although, as I say, it wasn't a desirable appointment, it wasn't a really poor one either in terms of what he'd done previously and where Arsenal were. I think it proved itself to be the wrong move and the wrong appointment. Obviously, it's why he got sacked. But I just, for me, it was a hard one to get on board with because we'd heard about Ancelotti. We'd heard about all these top names. And then when Unai Emery came in, because we literally heard about it the day before he was appointed, didn't we? Unai Emery's flown into London to have talks with Arsenal. Bang, the next day he's the manager. And you're thinking to yourself, well, this is a bit underwhelming. Not the worst appointment in the world, but we'll take it and we'll see how it goes. When he took over the club in the summer. So he had an entire pre-season to get his ideas across, to get his messages across. And he took over a club that had finished in 6th place the season prior, 12 points off of the top 4, and who had fallen in the Europa League semi-finals to Atletico Madrid, a very strong Atletico Madrid. So that's the position from which Unai Emery took over Arsenal. Now, to provide some context around the environment that Mikel Arteta took over the team in, I think is important as well. So we've done the Unai Emery side. We'll talk a little bit about Arteta, then we'll go on to talk about various other elements before we get to that summary and that conclusion. Mikel Arteta takes over from Unai Emery, who was sacked in November 2019. Mikel takes over December 2019. Now, we know that Mikel Arteta was somebody who was looked at when Unai Emery was initially hired. We know that discussions took place, but we know that for whatever reason, and there's different accounts of this, it didn't happen. Was it because Arsenal didn't want to back him the way he wanted to be backed? Was it because he wasn't sure about the direction the club was headed in? Was it because he wasn't ready to leave Manchester City? We don't really know what the reason is for this. There's been, as I say, contradictory reports suggesting some of those things I've just mentioned, but I guess we will never really know. But Arsenal eventually got their man. They brought in Mikel Arteta, who, as I mentioned, was clearly a top target prior to Unai Emery's arrival. Now, he built a really, really good reputation as a coach at Manchester City. Various senior players had come out and talked about how well he'd done on the training ground, how much he'd improved them individually. But was he ready to leave the nest and essentially fly solo at a club as big and win the expectations of Arsenal Football Club? it felt like an almighty gamble. I've got to be honest. If you go back to the podcast that I did just prior to Mikel Arteta's appointment, and I did it with two friends, Simon Alavi, Dan DeLuca, Social Club. We used to do the weekly debate show, and we talked about Ancelotti or Arteta. Which one should it be? For me, it was Carlo Ancelotti, and by quite some distance. We were talking about an experienced coach. I felt that Arsenal had gone cheap in hiring Unai Emery. I felt like Arsenal had threatened to bring in this or suggested they were going to bring in this super coach to replace Arsene Wenger and really take the club on. When Arsenal had been stalling under Arsene, the only way was to go out and get this top coach. And then when Unai Emery came in, it felt like a bit of a cheap appointment. It felt as though we'd kind of missed that top level and just hit that bracket below, in which Unai Emery fell. And so, when Mikel Arteta was appointed, it was incredibly underwhelming. I think Mikel Arteta did really well in the early stages of his managerial tenure in terms of saying the right things. I think that is so important as a manager, that you get people's buy-in, and that buys you time. And that's what Mikel Arteta did. From the very beginning, he came in, he was clear about what he wanted to do. He was clear about what he would and wouldn't accept. He called them the non-negotiables, and he bought himself some time. Unai Emery didn't do that. So that's already one disadvantage for Unai Emery. Now, I'm not saying that Unai Emery could help that. The language barrier was clearly a big problem. And that prevented him communicating effectively with the fans, communicating effectively with the media, communicating effectively with maybe some of the people around him. So I'm not saying, I'm not saying that Mikel Arteta should be given more time or should be allowed to just get away with anything he wants because of the fact that his English is better. But it is a point, and it is something that, to me, again, and I don't want this to come across as though I'm slagging off people that don't speak English. I'm not. I just think that if you go and work in a bank in China, let's say you go and work in a bank in China, for example. I was in banking before. If somebody told me that I was going to go and work for the Beijing branch and I couldn't speak a word of Chinese, naturally I would find, or Mandarin or Cantonese, if somebody told me I was going to have to go over to that country and quickly adapt to the culture, quickly learn the language, and be, in a position where I had to communicate in that language, I would find it incredibly difficult. So it's not slagging him off, but it is a factor. It has to be a factor. I don't see how people can overlook it. Mikkel, when he took the club over mid-season, 10th in the Premier League, and he went on to win the FA Cup. He went on to win the FA Cup, and in many ways, that really did, in my opinion, raise the level of expectation and add pressure to him. Add pressure in the sense of he now had to go into the new season with people seeing Arsenal manage to get it right tactically in a couple of games against some of the big sides. And now all of a sudden Arsenal fans were expecting us to go into that new campaign competitive, and at the top level. And for me, that was wrong. I said it at the time. I said it repeatedly. We had to temper those expectations. We had to learn quite quickly that actually, yes, we'd beaten Manchester City and Chelsea in one-off fixtures in which Mikel Arteta's game plan worked perfectly. But it didn't mean that this team were ready to qualify for the Champions League. It didn't mean we'd progressed that much in such a short space of time. So some people, like Black and Blanco in the chat, says winning the FA Cup helped. I actually don't think it did. I really don't. I think that what it did was raise the expectation for Mikel's first full season in charge. And look, we'll come on to talking about that and stuff in a little bit more detail. Some of you in the chat calling me, Arteta's lawyer, all the usual stuff I get. I'm infatuated with him, apparently, all the usual stuff I get. And again, as I said at the beginning, if you've got points that make sense, if you've got points to counter some of my points, then by all means pop them in the chat. But let's have some actual constructive points instead of just nonsense comments like that. But Yeah, so did the FA Cup actually buy him time? Not for me, because he finished 8th in the Premier League from 10th. I don't think whether he won the FA Cup or not, I'd have been standing there calling for his head, given he took over in December and okay, the improvement wasn't significant in terms of our league form. It saw us go up 2 places. But FA Cup or not, I wouldn't have been calling for Mikel Arteta's head at that stage. So for some people, that FA Cup win might have bought him time, but it didn't buy him time for me. I was still prepared to give him a full season in charge, regardless of that. So I don't think it helped. As I say, I think it actually heaped pressure on him. I think Mikkel obviously came in as a head coach as well, but I think Mikkel was in a place, and this worked to his benefit, where the structure around the rest of the club wasn't strong enough to deny him what he wanted. So you look at how Unai Emery came in. He wanted certain players. He wanted to bring them in. Those ideas or plans were blocked or changed by the people at the top, by the people running the club, by Sven Mislintat and all the others who were tasked with those duties. So Mikkel had a bit of a touch when he walked in and found that actually the structure at this club currently, yeah, Raul Sanllehi was there, but structurally, it was a bit of a mess. It was a bit of a shambles, and he could take advantage of that. So I think that worked in Arteta's favour, and that's something that he had to his advantage that Unai Emery certainly didn't. But in September 2020, Mikel Arteta was promoted to manager instead of just head coach. And again, it's another thing in Mikel's favour. It's another area in which he was given more freedom, more say, and more control than Unai Emery was. Why did he get promoted to manager at that point? He certainly hadn't done enough to deserve it. He just won the FA Cup. Okay. We started the new campaign. He was a month into it, and bang, Mikel Arteta gets given the job of manager, and now has more control, more say, more influence than Unai Emery ever had at the football club, with those at the very top and those bringing in players, those responsible for bringing in players, and those in control of the purse strings. So those are some points that obviously benefited Mikkel. The thing that I don't think benefited Mikkel, though, and I think that you have to consider and you have to say was quite big, is the COVID pandemic. I think the COVID pandemic made life for Mikel Arteta quite difficult. I think it would have been difficult for Unai Emery as well, had he been in charge at that particular period. But I think when you're an inexperienced manager, still trying to find your feet, trying to find your identity, I think it's even more unsettling to be put in a position like that. And I think Mikel Arteta really struggled and really suffered from that. Equally, though, that's not Unai Emery's fault. But I think in a position where Arsenal, had that pandemic happened when Unai Emery was in charge, I think Unai Emery has more experience to draw upon, more know-how, and therefore he can manage that situation a little bit more effectively than Mikel Arteta did. Now, you can always circle this back around and go to that point of, well, why was Mikel Arteta hired then? If he was that inexperienced, if he was that sort of fresh in terms of trying to find his feet and identity as a manager, he shouldn't have got the job in the first place. And I agree with that, because it's not me that hired him, and it's not me that even wanted him necessarily. But I think we cannot overlook a load of these factors. So people are saying in the chat, the COVID thing didn't impact any other club, but it impacted Arsenal. How many other managers were at the stage in their careers in the Premier League that Mikel Arteta was at when the COVID hit? How many other managers were at that stage in their careers, but also at clubs with incredibly high expectations? Very, very few. Lots of clubs were impacted by the pandemic financially, in terms of how their training went, how they were able to kind of get ideas across as managers, etc., etc. But we're talking about Arsenal now. So the rest of the league is irrelevant to me. I'm talking about the impact it had on Arsenal. And we know that there was an impact on Arsenal. We know that Arsenal, via Hector Bellerin, pleaded with the players to take a pay cut. Again, another thing that Mikel Arteta has to deal with. Now, Mikel Arteta would have, Mikel Arteta would have been told by his bosses that he had to try and push through this pay cut to speak with his players. And as an employee, you're going to do it. You're going to do it. You're going to do what you need to do. But I'm sure that didn't go down well with some of the senior players who were maybe already skeptical about him and his appointment. So I think you cannot overlook the pandemic. And look, Afsar Gunner sarcastically in the comments says, let's blame COVID-19. I'm not saying let's blame COVID-19. I'm saying it's a factor. I've just reeled off a list of things that we have to consider, both with Unai Emery and both with Mikel Arteta. So to kind of summarize this little section, I think Unai Emery took over at a difficult time where he was expected to follow on from the great Arsene Wenger. That comes with an incredible pressure, the likes of which Mikkel hasn't faced yet. He was kind of restricted and had his hands tied behind his back in terms of the players that he was able to bring in. I think he struggled with the language barrier. But the thing that worked in his favor, obviously, was that he took over a club that finished sixth. And then that was low enough to move Arsene Wenger on. He took over a club that finished sixth and he had greater experience. Mikel Arteta took over at a difficult time. I think the FA Cup, in my opinion, added pressure rather than relieved it. I don't think he was ever under real pressure between December when he took over and May when he won, or August, because obviously the season stopped. But the few months between taking over and winning the FA Cup, he wasn't ever in a pressured situation, I would say. So that's my view on that. I think he's had advantages in that the structure around the club has been more geared towards the manager, towards Mikel Arteta, to allow him to do what he wants to do in terms of recruitment, in terms of playing style, philosophy, etc., etc. So I think he's had some advantage in that way. But I think the pandemic has also had an impact too. So points good and bad on both sides at this stage of this discussion. SK says Bielsa doesn't speak English. The reasons for Emery sacking is just childish. Nobody's saying, SK, that Unai Emery was sacked because he didn't speak English. I'm just saying, I think I'm assessing. I've sat all morning writing down notes on both sides because I wanted to make this as fair a debate and discussion as I possibly could. And I've sat down and I've had thoughts. I've done some research. I've looked at stats, facts, etc., some of which I'm going to be giving you a little bit later on in the show to try and come to these conclusions. I'm not saying Unai Emery was sacked because he didn't speak English. I'm saying it was one of a number of factors that prevented him doing well at Arsenal Football Club, one of which wasn't really in his control. I think that you make a point about Marcelo Bielsa. Marcelo Bielsa is at a point in his career where his football philosophy is clear. Everybody knows it. And I'll tell you one thing, I promise you, Marcelo Bielsa can speak much better English than he lets on. Remember Mauricio Pochettino when he first came to the Premier League? He didn't speak English for a while. He had a translator, etc., etc. For me, he's somebody who did know more than he let on and felt that it was a good way of getting his head down, getting on with his work, and basically kind of fending everybody off by playing the I don't speak any English at all card. And maybe that's what Unai Emery should have done at the start. Instead of being adamant that he was going to face this head on, I don't know if the club had anything to do with kind of pushing him out in front of the media or wheeling him out every single time and expecting him to do that or at least try. But I think that had a negative impact, and I think it stopped. I think it stopped him. I think it caused. I think it caused problems for him in a number of ways, whether it be with the media, and whether it be with communicating with his players. So yeah, as Craig says, like, let's not, when I'm making a list of points, let's not jump on one point and make a big deal out of it, because there is a whole list of them. I promise you there are loads. This is not something I've just cooked up in my head in the last 5 minutes. Also, reputation. Bielsa is the Pope of pressing in modern day football. Exactly. Marcelo Bielsa is someone with a huge reputation, and you're probably willing as a fan to give him a bit more leeway. And remember, Leeds were in the Championship. You know, the expectation of Leeds was get promoted. He failed that in his first season, Marcelo Bielsa, and they gave him another go. Unai Emery missed out on the Champions League in his first full season and then was given the chop a few months into the next season when Arsenal were 10th. So, you know, the expectation was incredibly different. Let's move on then. So we've talked about the context, about some of the environment in which they were asked to work on. And I've done a bit of a comparison in terms of the squads that they had. And I think this bit is really important. I think this is really important because a lot of us over the last few weeks and months, and I've seen it in the chat constantly, have talked about which one of these two managers had the best side, which one had the squad from which he was able to extract the most, who would get him closer to the Champions League. Now, we know Unai Emery finished a point outside of the top four in his first full season. And so what I've done with this is, instead of comparing the squads that they took over, I've done it in a way where, because obviously a manager can't always get rid of everybody that he wants to straight away. He can't always bring in all the players that he wants to straight away. So I'm looking at the two squads. I'm looking at Unai Emery's Arsenal squad, which was his one full season in charge, 18-19 season. And then I'm looking at Arteta and his squad in the 2021 season. So both of those squads are from the two seasons these managers have had, full seasons these managers have had. And that's how I'm going to make the comparison. I think it's the fairest way to do it. So Unai Emery had goalkeepers at his disposal: Petr Cech, Bernd Leno. Mikel Arteta obviously had Martinez at one stage, and obviously we moved him on. But look, you know what? Actually, let's do it this way. Forget the Arteta bit for a minute. Let's talk about Emery's squad. Cech and Leno. He had Laurent Koscielny, centre-back leader. Okay, he didn't leave under the best circumstances. In fact, they were quite shitty circumstances, but he was a leader within the group and at a level beyond anything else we had as far as centre-backs went. In midfield, I think Unai Emery had greater depth. He had Xhaka. He had, who divides opinion. But anyway, I'm just talking about names for now. We'll get into the individuals later. Xhaka, Torreira, Guendouzi, Ramsey, Ozil, Iwobi. When you talk about forwards, you know, you can talk about playing style, and you could say that Unai Emery's playing style was a little bit more ambitious, a little bit more open, a little bit more attacking. But as a squad, Unai Emery's statistically, factually, had more goals in it. More goals in it than Mikel Arteta's. Here's why. In Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang's full season under Mikel Arteta, he managed 15 goals. In his full season under Unai Emery, he managed 31. That is more than double. Do not underestimate what a difference it makes to have a 15-goal striker or a 30-goal striker. It can be the difference between winning and not winning so many games. Alexander Lacazette under Unai Emery. And again, some of this is down to Unai Emery's playing style. I accept that, and we'll come on to that in a bit. Alexander Lacazette had his best scoring season in an Arsenal shirt under Unai Emery with 19 goals. Aaron Ramsey scored 6 goals and provided 8 assists. Henrik Mkhitaryan, 6 goals, 7 assists. Lucas Torreira provided 5 assists, and I think he scored 2 goals. Can't even read my own notes. Hector Bellerin provided 5 assists, again, largely down to Unai Emery's playing style. Alex Iwobi, who people were laughing at when he was at the football club, that season, in Unai Emery's full season, scored 6 goals and provided 9 assists. Danny Welbeck got 5 goals. Mesut Ozil got 6 goals and provided 3 assists. Not only did that squad have more goals and more assists in that, it had more seniority. You do not win things with kids. You simply don't. Aside from what we have now, when you're talking about the seniority, Unai Emery had Petr Cech, won it all. Laurent Koscielny, Nacho Monreal, senior model professional. Even Lichtsteiner was a winner and a, somebody with plenty of experience. Henrik Mkhitaryan, people didn't like him. He's killing it in Italy now. Experienced senior player who'd won things. Aaron Ramsey, experienced senior player who'd won things. Danny Welbeck, senior experienced player who'd won things. Now, I completely appreciate, and I've mentioned it a few times already, but we'll focus in on it now, that Unai Emery's playing style gave Unai Emery a better platform in which to extract goals from these types of players. I completely agree with that. But defensively under Unai Emery, we were a shambles. And we were very similar to all the kind of sides that Arsene Wenger had managed in the last few years in terms of bombing players too far forward, leaving ourselves exposed, and getting battered by top teams, struggling to be consistent enough to compete for the things that we wanted to, and that was all largely down to us not defending well enough. Unai Emery was too attack minded during his time at Arsenal in some aspects, and Mikel Arteta has been too defensively minded. So it's, for me, it's kind of finding that right balance, which neither manager managed to do. Right? Let's be honest. I'm not saying Mikel's done it, because he hasn't. He's brought us into a place where, Unai Emery took us to a place where we were scoring goals, but we were still conceding too many. Mikel Arteta has taken us into a place where, at least last season, we improved in that element, in that sort of area of our game, but never managed to then find that balance up front. So neither manager, not Emery, not Arteta, found the right balance, but they both were at different things of the different ends of the scale, if you like. Dipak says, this is not a debate. Harry's on a monologue. Well, it's a podcast of me talking. If I stop every 2 seconds to get every single comment, then there's no flow to it. And people listening on the audio who can't see your comments are going to be like, what the hell is this? So we're going to get your questions. We're going to get your thoughts in a little bit. I promise. But just to summarize with the squad analysis from Unai Emery's point, I think Unai Emery's side had more goals in it. It had more creativity in it. It had more seniority in it. And it had overall a better balance for me. That is the reasons why I think players like Mkhitaryan, players like Ramsey, players like Iwobi, players like Mesut Ozil, players like Danny Welbeck had significant impacts, as well as the fact that Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang was a much better player at that point. When you take all of those things into consideration, that for me is stronger than what Mikel Arteta has. And some of that will be Mikel Arteta's own fault, because he's moved some of those players I've mentioned on. Some of them were gone before he arrived, but he has had an impact in shaping his current squad. And for that, he needs to be held accountable. But we laughed at people like Henrik Mkhitaryan. We wanted him out. What a bad deal that was, said the Arsenal fan base. Aaron Ramsey, we don't need him anyway. Let him go. Alex Iwobi, we've just robbed Everton blind for him. Let him go. Mesut Ozil, get him out of our football club. And then we move on to Mikel Arteta's squad, and we look at the stats from the 2021 season, which was his full season in charge. And we look at a different Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, a Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang who didn't even manage half of the goals he managed in that full season under Unai Emery. We look at a real lack of goals in midfield. People rave about Bukayo Saka, and rightly so. He's an incredible talent. He's someone that will go on to good things, I believe, in the game. But I mean, for all the positives that Bukayo Saka brings to the side, and for all the great things he does, and this is not to dig him out, this is just stating facts. He only managed one more goal than Alex Iwobi did in that full season under Unai Emery. Emile Smith-Rowe managed 4 goals. Danny Welbeck managed 5, and he hardly played. Mesut Ozil managed 6, and he didn't play all that much. That's what you got to look at. You've got to look at the level of the squad. Martin Odegaard managed 2. Danny Ceballos under Mikel Arteta, 0 goals. Joe Willock, 3 in all competitions. So the point I'm making is that when we were all sitting there as Arsenal fans talking about how poor the squad was under Unai Emery and what a shit show he inherited, we've actually ended up with an even weaker side now. And the stats and the facts prove that. This is not me defending Mikel Arteta. Let me make that clear, because Mikel Arteta is partly responsible, is largely responsible now for the squad that we currently have at our disposal. But how people can say to me that Saka, Smith Rowe, Odegaard, at this stage in their careers, are going to match the outputs of an experienced Aaron Ramsey, of an experienced Henrik Mkhitaryan, and of even Alex Iwobi and Mesut Ozil is beyond me. Is beyond me. Saka's not there yet. He might get there and he should get there, and I'm sure he will very soon, but he's not there yet. Neither is Alex Iwobi. And people can say in the chat, this is embarrassing. People can say in the chat that this is complete and utter nonsense. The facts are there. Look them up. You will find Alex Iwobi, full season under Unai Emery, 6 goals, 9 assists. Saka, 1 goal more. Emil Smith Rowe, 4 goals. Henrik Mkhitaryan got more than that, and he contributed 7 assists. Martin Odegaard, 2 goals. Lucas Torreira got 2 goals under Unai Emery. So, do you see where I'm going with this? I'm not saying that Mikel Arteta is not to blame for the squad we currently have. I've actually said the opposite earlier on in the show. I've said, actually, Mikel Arteta does have more control, does have more freedom about the players he's brought in. But we need to stop this thing of Mikel Arteta's got a much better squad than Unai Emery. He hasn't. It's probably his fault. In fact, it is his fault, but he hasn't got a better squad than the squad Unai Emery had. We as Arsenal fans, as we always do, and as we've done so many times with certain players, have made scapegoats out of the likes of Mkhitaryan, out of the likes of Ramsey at times, out of the likes of Alex Iwobi, when actually they were doing a better job for us in terms of outputs, in terms of goals scored, in terms of assists, in terms of direct goal contributions than our current so-called golden generation have. And again, it's not a slight on those players. I think they will come good, but to be solely reliant on them, to be mainly reliant on them, to be focusing our game around those players is a fundamental mistake that Mikel Arteta is making. And it's one that will see us fall short. No doubt about it. There's a few super chats in the comments. Let me just pick those up because I'm conscious of missing those because they do disappear off the screen quite quickly. Daniel, thank you for your kind donation, mate. He says, does Mikel Arteta base his fashion sense off Pep? I don't know what that has to do with it, but yeah, he probably does. Thank you for your donation, though, mate. Aussie Gooner says, Arsenal received Besiktas bid for Mohamed El-Neni with 3 injuries away from having the same lineup as our first 3 games. I don't know about that at the moment because I'm live, but I'm sure if that's true, we'll discuss that a little bit later on our second stream of the day. Paul says Arteta's system doesn't create chances. Be honest. Completely agree. JM says straightforward. The goals dried up due to, is that Arteta's style? And yeah, look, you can't deny. You can't deny that Mikel Arteta's playing style means that we don't create as many chances, means that we don't play on the front foot as much. That is absolutely true and it's absolutely fact. But what I am simply saying to you guys is that we had players at the football club during Unai Emery's time who were producing more in terms of outputs, but who were also more experienced, more senior. And I've run off a list of senior players at the time who would have been people that young players can look to in the dressing room when times were going tough, who would have been through difficult periods in their careers prior and realized that they can get out of it and worked out how to get out of it and understood that if they trust in what it is that they do and what it is they do very well, they will get to the point where things start to turn around. We simply do not have that seniority and we do not have that experience in this current squad. Not enough of it anyway, and certainly not as much of it as we had under Unai Emery. Having said all that about Arteta's squad, he is the one in control of it. He has had more control than Unai Emery in terms of recruitment. And, there's that's the way it is. He's got to be held accountable for that. I think he's come in with a different remit, though, to Unai Emery. I think that you also have to factor that in. I think when Unai Emery came in, it was very much about get us back in the Champions League and get us back in the Champions League now, today. Because that's what Unai Emery does. He wins Europa Leagues and he gets people into the Champions League. That is what Unai Emery's remit was when he took the job, for sure. But Mikel Arteta was given more leeway because he was brought in to do a project, to oversee a longer-term project once Arsenal realised a rebuild was needed. That's why he is being judged in a different way to Unai Emery. And again, I'm not even saying it's right. What I'm saying is that Arsenal, when they brought Unai Emery in, would have had some objectives that he needed to hit. And those objectives will be different from Mikel Arteta because of the fact that he picked up the club in a different phase, in a different stage. And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at in terms of the squads. I think, look, I've mentioned it. I think that Emile Smith-Rowe, I think that Saka, I think that Martinelli, all of these players will come good, and they are the future of Arsenal. But to rely on them solely shows you actually that the squad isn't as strong as it was before. And it shows you that we're taking an almighty gamble in trusting in them to really elevate their level in such a short period of time. Let me go over to the to YouTube and see what's going on. I can see there's over 350 of you watching us live, which is fantastic. So thank you all so much. I can see we've only got 78 likes on the board. If that's because you don't like what I'm saying, fair enough. There's a few dislikes on there as well, which I expected, because for some reason, people in the chat seem to only take half of what I say, only pick out the points that suggest I'm solely backing Mikel Arteta. I haven't even given you guys my conclusion yet on this for you to kind of make that judgment. I've presented points, I feel, on both sides around, you know, who had the harder job. I think I've spoken about positives with Unai Emery, things that he had to deal with. I've also spoken about advantages Mikkel had and some of the disadvantages that he's had as well. So I'm trying to be as balanced and as fair with this. So if you at least appreciate that, then please do hit the like button. It really, really does help. Rahul says, I disliked because you're not judging Arteta on facts. I've literally just rolled off a page of facts. I've literally spent the morning writing a page out of facts, which I've just rolled off to you. And apparently I'm not speaking in facts, but anyway, let's move on, because there is more. There is more. Yes. Let's talk about some of their highs and some of their lows. And I think as a manager, you will have moments in your managerial career that are defining. You will have moments where certain games, certain fixtures, certain defeats will turn people off of you, will make people feel as though that kind of relationship needs to be broken, that it needs to end. And there will be other moments that make you feel like, yeah, I can really trust in this manager. And sometimes a lot of it is dictated by those moments. You know, that's how I see it. I think if you look at the highs that Unai Emery brought to the team, obviously that 21-22 game unbeaten run, whatever it was incredibly encouraging. It was a real positive. That's one of the highs, probably the biggest high of Unai Emery's tenure. The fact that he took us to the Europa League final was a high. Obviously, the way it finished wasn't, but the fact that he took us to a first European final in ages was a high for Unai Emery. When you think about the highs of Mikel Arteta, obviously the FA Cup win, which we've discussed already, that was the standout. But when you talk about lows, this is what really kind of feels like a kick for fans. You know, these lows, they can make you go off a manager. They can be the final straw, can't they, quite often, when fans are kind of judging managers and when they're kind of deciding whether to continue believing and trusting or whether they want to change or not. And there were lows for both. You know, as I mentioned, Unai Emery, the Europa League final, the manner of the defeat was humiliating. It was embarrassing. It really hurt. What also really hurt for me with Unai Emery, and probably was my that's it moment with him, was when we messed up in those home games against Palace and Brighton, when we had the top four within our grasp, when we messed up in those games because Unai Emery tinkered with the team and put all his eggs in the Europa League basket. And maybe we should have expected that. He is the Europa League manager at the end of the day. But he messed around with a team, perhaps showed his lack of Premier League experience by feeling or thinking that we could get away with doing that in games in the Premier League, and it blew up in our faces. I think with Mikel Arteta, that run in the lead up to Christmas was awful last season. That was the ultimate low. But sometimes, as I say, you have those 1 games or 2 games where you just completely lose faith, or you start to question why you ever had that faith. And for me, with Mikel Arteta, it was that game against Villarreal. I thought he tactically cocked it up against Villarreal in the Europa League, and we ended up getting dumped out, and essentially our season was over. So, there's highs for both, there's lows for both. And again, I'm trying to look at it from both sides, but that's the highs and lows that I came up with when just kind of thinking about the two. So in terms of a summary, and I am going to give you guys a brief summary, I expected more from Unai Emery because he was an experienced coach. I think the club had a structure that wasn't necessarily geared towards giving the head coach all the license, but it was a structure, and a better structure than the one we have now. I think he had a more experienced and ripe group of players, although Mikel Arteta is kind of responsible for that. I don't think we ever had a clear style under Unai Emery. I think it kept changing. It was more attacking than Mikel Arteta's, but it was still unclear. We saw different formations, different systems, and a lot of tinkering with the 11. Going on to Mikel Arteta, I think he has had that power that Unai Emery never did around transfers, around bringing people in, around making big decisions within the club. And he's not always used that to the best of his ability. I think his man management has been awful. I think he's responsible for assembling this squad that we currently have. So when I talk about Emery's squad being stronger in terms of outputs and in terms of seniority, Mikkel has to hold his hands up for that. He is responsible for that. He can't sit there and cry about that because he is the one that assembled this group that we have now. He's made enough signings now, moved enough players on for him to be held accountable for that. I think he did struggle with the pandemic. But again, just like Unai Emery, I don't see a style of play. And just like when Unai Emery was in his second season, I don't really see how this moves forward. So in summary, neither of them are good enough to manage Arsenal Football Club. Neither of them have done enough after one. Neither of them did enough after one full season to suggest to people or to make it clear to people that they were the right man. Actually, Unai Emery probably did more in his first season. Obviously, he finished in a much better league position and got to a European final. So you have to say he did more there. But even then, given that I think it was a stronger squad, I still think he didn't do enough in that first full campaign or first campaign full stop to get me on board, to win me over. But equally, neither has Mikkel now. And that's where we're at. In summary, in my opinion, I think when you take into account all of those factors, I think Mikel Arteta has had the harder job because he's had to deal with a lot of different things and take control of a lot of different areas that Unai Emery never really had to worry about. But it's not by a lot, because with that extra responsibility comes greater control. When you don't have control, you can't fix things. You can fix things if you have control. When you have too much control, sometimes you spread yourself too thin and you end up being a jack of all trades and a master of none, which I think is probably happening a little bit with Mikel Arteta. But the real problem and the real thing that we should all be looking at, and why we should all be wary of just pulling the trigger on managers without giving them time to do what they need to do, is simply because none of us trust KSE to get it right again. I think they've got it wrong twice. Is it going to be third time lucky? I don't know. But for me, when I look, I find it hard to separate the two now, given where we are at this stage. But I do think Unai Emery had a better squad. I do think he was a more experienced manager. Therefore, I naturally expected more. And I think that I think this thing that people say, or about him having a much worse team than Mikel Arteta, I think is a myth. I really do. I think he had a better team than Mikel Arteta. And so I'm going to say Mikkel had the ever so slightly more difficult job. Yes, he spent money. The market's moved on even more since when Unai Emery's Arsenal was spending money, which has led to big transfer fees like the one we paid for Ben White, like we paid for a number of other players, which has been a little bit maybe over the top. both had challenges. Both have failed at various points. Both have done some things well. Both have done some things poorly. So for me, my summary, my conclusion, having looked at all of this morning, having dug up the facts, and somebody said in the chat, you know, oh, well, just because you wrote them down means they were facts. Well, I didn't write them down off the top of my head. I wrote them down from research. But neither of them were good enough. That's the fact. You know, Unai Emery wasn't good enough, hence why he was sacked. I didn't see all these people complaining when Unai Emery was sacked. They're just complaining now because Mikel Arteta's Arsenal are in a worse off position. But Mikel Arteta had challenges to take on. And unfortunately, in a lot of those areas, he's not excelled. And that's why we are where we are now. So who's had the tougher job? I'm going to say slightly Mikel Arteta, but not by much. And that brings me on to our poll. Because I did put a poll out on Twitter, and I'm curious to see what you guys have said, how that poll has ended up. And I know I get a lot of stick for saying what I say, but I'd be interested to see what the general kind of consensus is on that. Is it just me that thinks this way? Clearly, it is not, despite what some of you in the chat say, because if you look at the results of our poll thus far, and there's 7 hours left, we've got 731 votes. 39.5% think that Unai Emery had the more difficult job, but a resounding 60.5% think that it was indeed Mikel Arteta who had the bigger task. So that concludes the podcast. I know a lot of you disagree with me. And as I said before, you know, get your comments in, explain why. And I'm going to go through them now. Whether you got comments, questions, let's spend 10, 15 minutes going through some of those from the chat box. You can agree, you can disagree. It's absolutely fine. Let's hear why. Let's hear the whys, you know. What else have we got in the chat then? Come on then. Let's maybe having it. I don't know where that comment is going that I was about to read, so I'm not going to read it. Christophe Michel says, let's see what actually occurs when the full first team is on the pitch for a run of matches and get into a rhythm. If Mikel Arteta has to go after that, fine. It looks like a top club, 6 club for now. Time will tell. Lots of you talking about who should replace Mikel if he's sacked. I'm not going to go down that road now because I think that's something that we should only really discuss when that time comes. 10-6 Dan says, didn't expect Arsenal to win any of the 3. Can't wait to see how Arsenal plays now. Arteta has no excuses because we should have a fully fit squad and Xhaka won't be playing. Time to see Partey and Lokonga in the middle. Glenn Life says, in the words of Super Hands, people like Coldplay and voted for the Nazis. You can't trust people, Harry. Adam Chisholm says, is Arteta worse than Bruce Rioch? I don't remember Bruce Rioch at Arsenal, so I cannot possibly comment from an informed position on that. Craigie says, Arteta's negative tactics are what is killing this team. He simply refuses to play to our strengths and plays an overly defensive game, but we still lose. It's ridiculous. Archangel YouTube poll says Emery had it harder, 58 to 42%. Interesting. The Modern Gooner says, you've convinced me otherwise. I originally selected Emery, but after the comparison, you are right. Daniel says that Arteta needs someone beside him. He should have asked Henry. Let's see what else we've got. Vikshan's asking about the potential Qatari takeover. Don't know anything on that. Don't know anything of note on that. Don't know that it's moving along. Don't know that there's even an offer. So I'm not going to I'm not going to say I do. It would be nice, wouldn't it? But don't see it at this moment in time. Maximus says, I know I have a go at you, Harry, but my question is, what have you seen in Arteta that propels you into this stern defense of this fraud? Seriously, is it his exciting champagne football or his hair? I don't even defend him though. Like I hate this because this is this is something I've been portrayed as, right, on social media over the last 6 months, which is for me, quite frankly, ridiculous. when have I come on a podcast after an Arsenal defeat and sat there and defended every single thing that Mikel Arteta has done? I haven't. When have I defended all of his recruitment? I haven't. I've said throughout the summer that I wasn't sure about some of these signings. I've said repeatedly, I don't think that we should have paid what we paid for some of these players. It's not defending Mikel Arteta. It's understanding where we're actually at. You know, if you're just going to say, oh, well, we're not good enough, this is not good enough, this is not good enough, but never actually understand the context of why we are where we are, then you're always going to be disappointed. You need to temper the expectations that you had. As I said, when Unai Emery came into Arsenal Football Club, his job was to get us straight back in the Champions League. He failed to do that. Therefore, he was sacked. He failed to do that the first season, despite having 2 really good opportunities to do it. We fell at the final hurdle. Yeah, some of that's down to the players, of course, as well. And then he started the second season horrendously. We were in 10th place and he was sacked. Mikel Arteta's remit and objective when he came in was to rebuild Arsenal. Yeah, let's get back in the Champions League as quickly as possible. But the club, rightly or wrongly, and it could well be wrongly, accepted that Mikel Arteta was coming in for a longer term project. Therefore, you can't measure them by all the exact same metrics because their objectives are different. And this is the point I have been trying to harp on about throughout. A lot of Mikel Arteta's job has been get loads of these players out, bring young, fresh, vibrant talent into the club. That is why he's been back this summer. And that is why he's been backed to specifically bring in the profile of players that he has. Is it going to work? Is it going to work? I don't know. You don't know. Nobody knows if it's going to work in the longer term. But that is what he's been asked to do. That is what he's been asked to do. Forget what you read in the press. Forget what KSE say to me or you. They tell us to be excited. Forget that. Their actual objective will not be the same as the objective that they publicly say, which is always, we're here to compete for the biggest trophy. It's not true. We know that. We know that Arsenal do not have the ambition. We know that Arsenal do not have the ambition to win the Premier League because KSE are rich enough to propel us to that level if they want, but they don't want to. Okay, it's as simple as that. People talking about Mikel Arteta saying he said UCL in 3 years. We're into his 3rd year and we're bottom. Look, I mean, come on, man. I mean, he obviously would like to win the UEFA Champions League. If you are one of those people that heard Willian say that Mikel Arteta told me we're going to win the Champions League or we're aiming to win the Champions League within 3 years, and you believe that, I want to sell you something because you are gullible. That is one of the most gullible things I've ever come across in life. How can someone actually look at that group of players that Mikel Arteta had at his disposal last summer and look at Mikel Arteta as well, a rookie manager, and say, yes, with all seriousness, this team is going to compete for the Champions League within 3 years? It's a mile off. We're probably 3 years away from actually qualifying for the competition, let alone winning it. And that is where, as fans, you shouldn't believe everything you read. And actually, you should make your own judgments based on the facts, based on what your eyes tell you, and not buy into every single thing that people say. Jid says, don't bother yourself, Harry. Some people hate Arteta now because it's a cool thing to do. It makes people think they're credible in their opinions, whether they are devoid of the context. And lots of you commenting as well about my dodgy American accent. Sorry about that. I hope I haven't offended anyone. That was not my intention, I promise you. But yeah, that's where we're at. That's where we're at. So in summary, I think that Mikel Arteta has had a slightly more difficult job than Unai Emery at Arsenal. I appreciate both had challenges. I appreciate some had certain things that worked in their favor and both had disadvantages, which I think I've put across fairly. You might disagree, but I think I've done, to the best of my ability, a fair comparison between the two. And there we are. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you to every single one of you who has joined us in the live chat. To those of you who will be watching this back later, of which I'm sure there'll be plenty. And to those of you listening to us via the audio platforms, it all helps. If you are listening via the audio, then please do leave us a review. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do hit the like button. We've got 124 likes on the board, which isn't that many when you consider how many are watching. So please do hit the like button, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. It is still appreciated. Manscaped sponsor this podcast. I want to say a big thank you to them. If you haven't checked out their fantastic website and their excellent range of male grooming products, head over to the website now, www.manscaped.com. Enter our discount code, which is 90min20, and you shall receive 20% off as well as free worldwide shipping. We thank them as always for their very kind sponsorship. If you want to become a member of the channel, you can do so by clicking on the join button below or by clicking on the link in the description. If you're just wanting to subscribe without becoming a member, you can also do that too, and that really, really helps. I hope you've enjoyed the show. I hope you've enjoyed the discussion, even if you disagree, which is absolutely fine. Thank you all so much. I really, really appreciate it, and I'll catch you all a little bit later on today. Until then, ciao.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner, the Arsenal podcast.
I'm Martin Tyler, and you're listening to Harry Symeou.